Hello and welcome back, and today we want to return to the subject of direct attached storage. Hopefully you can see a graph here on screen taking place with Atto Disk Benchmark. This is taking advantage of the new Acasis or Acasis TB504 series, arriving in 3 different configurations. These are USB 4 and USB 4 V2 or Thunderbolt 5 NVMe enclosures. Now these are hefty beasts. Let's be realistic about this. There are plenty of M.2 NVMe enclosures in the market. So what on earth is setting them apart? Why have I started this video slightly differently by showing some performance benchmarks on screen rather than chucking them later on in the video? Let's restart those tests there. Now, why is that? Well, mainly because it would be very easy for me to just say, oh, you should buy it, it's really fast. You're going to see plenty of videos online about enclosures that just tell you this thing go fast by now. This, yes, is fast, hence why I'm showing you that on screen as it's being live connected to this via a Thunderbolt 5 connected Mac system. But crucially, this is one of the most ruggedly designed high performance ones I've ever seen. Now this is the USB 4 version. We're not talking about this today. I've only got it here on the table to give you some idea of what this enclosure looks like while this one's running the test. Don't worry, we'll turn it off later on. This is fanless, but it's also hefty as hell. This is designed for complete heat dissipation, allowing, among many things, the M.2 NVMe's to no longer be throttled, not only by the internal temperature, more on that later on, but also on the lane distribution. A lot of M.2 NVMe enclosures that arrive on the market, they may promote that they are connected via Thunderbolt 4, Thunderbolt 5, USB 4, USB 4 V2, and say 40 or 80 gigabits per second. And that is true. The connection on the rear of these devices will be that. But the M.2 NVMe's are generally not at that full speed. So for example, in a Thunderbolt 5 enclosure, it might have 4 or 8 bays or something, but they are going to be Gen 4 times 1, or if you're lucky, Gen 4 times 2, which halves or even quadruples down that performance from a potential 7,000 megabytes per second to as lowly as 12 or 1,500. That's important because the only way you're going to achieve the speed across multiple M.2 NVMe's out of that high performance external connection is going to be a RAID. And the majority of these enclosures do not include RAID. This one doesn't include RAID support. You have to do a software RAID or use a hardware RAID card on a connected system. Why is that important? Well, nice and simple. Because maybe you don't want to do that. You don't want to overhead onto the system. And also running a RAID on the client side can sometimes be problematic during an accidental connection. Now, what sets this apart is dynamic PCIe switching. Each of the 4 M.2 NVMe bays inside are Gen 4 times 4. Right now, the performance number you're seeing there on screen is me accessing one of those M.2 NVMe's. Now, because of that, it's not limiting that M.2 NVMe to some times 1 or times 2 speed. It's giving me the full throughput there, allowing me to achieve, right at the moment, at the time of talking, 6,570 megabytes per second read. In terms of write, I am hitting 6,183, and it gets a little better there as we finish our repeated 1 gig Atto test. Now, again, we've done loads of other tests. If I haven't already put them on screen, I'll show them on right now. If you put in 4 M.2 NVMe's, whichever one is active, you're going to get that full speed. But crucially, if you start using another one, you can still take advantage of the remainder of that additional bandwidth. Now, that does mean if you RAID them all together, the performance benefits by no means get doubled, tripled, or quadrupled as you add them like you may expect in a RAID 0, for example, which will generally give you an incremental performance increase, normally of around 15 to 20% per drive. Nonetheless, it still means that whether you're going to RAID them all together or you're going to be using drives individually, perhaps for different tasks, or you're going to be pairing them together in a RAID 1 or a RAID 10 environment, the result is going to be that you're not going to be throttled in a way that a lot of M.2 NVMe enclosures have a tendency to end up doing because of that ×1 restriction to individual slots. But let's talk a little bit more about the design of this thing. I've got it disconnected there, remove the boxes from the screen. Again, there is plenty of performance benchmarks we've been doing, and I'll add a lot of them to the written review below. But there's a guy called David Harry that did a 1 hour long video on the USB 4 version and talks about the remainder of the rest of the series. It is a great video. If I've not already put some of it on screen, I recommend you check that out. I'll link to it below. But again, for a deeper understanding of some of the kind of sustained benchmarks, I would say to recommend and check that out. For my part, I'm focusing a lot more on thermals, dissipation and power consumption. The reason being, I've tested a lot of M.2 NVMe enclosures over the years, and notwithstanding the more well-known fact that if an SSD gets too hot, or the controller at least gets too hot, less so than NAND, but if the controller gets too hot, the drive starts to throttle and lower in performance. Alongside, a lot of these higher performance enclosures can end up oversaturating the onboard cache of the NVMe anyway, which can also lead to slowdown. But there's not a huge amount we can do about that. That's just the trade-off with external and internal performance. But as this system was fanless, I was kind of concerned about just what level of performance we're going to be looking at here if this gets too hot. And I'm going to say, I saw no problems. I certainly saw the cache oversaturation on the drives lead to a performance drop, but that's not the fault of the enclosure. But alongside that top panel, which is so thick, it's one of the thickest enclosure casings I've ever seen that is pure dissipation. But there's another one of those on the other side as well, running all the way around to allow the heat to be drawn away from those drives. There's no little heat sinks that you attach to it. The case is the heatsink with thick thermal pads included with the retail kit there, alongside a relatively short Thunderbolt 5 cable included with it. Again, the casing does require screws to remove, but the M.2 NVMe's use those little rubber grommets there. And when it came to the thermals themselves, let's break that down into two. First, we'll talk about the SSDs themselves. I ran 3 of those M.2 NVMe's running speed tests with Blackmagic, AJA and Atto simultaneously. I didn't target the 4th drive. We'll talk about why in a second. During the course of that, for 15 minutes of sustained performance there, so that was non-stop, so you can see in real time the cache getting oversaturated there with the AJA test and the Blackmagic test as well. The temperatures on those NVMe's took ages to get even close to 50 degrees. They got to about 48, and as you can see, the drive that I wasn't hitting was growing in temp. Of course it was, because the other 3 NVMe's either side of it, SSDs that were listed alongside inside and on the software there, were all inside the same enclosure. So yes, they got hot, but obviously nowhere near as hot as the ones being constantly active. And over the course of those 15 minutes, another case that I have used before, a single drive case, would have comfortably been in the 60s and close to the 70s at that point. This had 4 NVMe's inside there, none of them, access or not, exceeding 50 to 52 degrees on a fanless enclosure when they all had 4x4 access on the PCIe. None of them were truly fully utilizing it to its fullest extent, because obviously they're all going out of a single 80 gig USB Type-C port, but still, those temps for an enclosure like this, running and gunning, were really, really impressive. And that extended to during those tests. In the last 2 to 3 minutes of that test, I then did a thermal check on the external of the enclosure there. Now, I also did a test when I had an external display attached to the device as well, with the drives being accessed in different scenarios. So hopefully you can see both of those on screen. And the temperatures obviously got quite high. They sat at the lowest. I saw on the side panels there where the M.2 NVMe's were, cranking close to the 50 degrees mark there. The front panel, 47, 48. The rear was actually among the coolest at 47 to 48. And again, the other side panel on the underside sitting at around 45 to 46 degrees. So keep that in mind. That wasn't the system sitting idle doing nothing. This was a system being bombarded in 2 different scenarios, and in one of those scenarios with an external display running through as well with the other port, because that's what you can do with these. You can also daisy chain these devices to add even more storage down the road. However, it ain't all perfect, because I will say during my testing, there was one thing I couldn't quite figure out, and that was the power consumption. Because when I had this 4-bay M.2 NVMe connected to my Mac system here, completely in idle, it sat at around 4 to 5 watts. And I'm thinking, okay then, that's fine. 4 to 5 watts, it's idle, it's 4 M.2 NVMe's, it's using an active Thunderbolt connection, it's not necessarily mounted or being accessed, that's mostly okay. When I had the drives mounted but not being accessed, so it was ready for activity, the power consumption went to 25 watts. That to me was unusually high for a fanless system. I know Thunderbolt 5 and USB 4 V2 has a kind of active ready architecture about it, but 25 watts for a system in comparative idle, not hibernation or standby as such, I was really surprised by. And that was repeated. I tried it with different NVMe's. I even swapped out to different PSUs, and we'll talk about the PSU in just a moment. And then when I went for heavy access with the M.2 NVMe's all being accessed and with the USB Type-C external display connected all via and managed by my Mac system, I saw a power consumption of around 36 to 40 watts. Again, sort of okay with that, but it's that idle number. And the PSU that this arrives with, it's not modest. It arrives with a 180 watt external power brick. Now, again, I get it. Thunderbolt 5 and USB 4 V2 is power hungry to reach those performance numbers. There is a draw. But still, that is an enormous power consumption for this device, without active cooling in a fan traditional sense. So again, I've reached out to the brand on this, and if they do have a response on this, an explanation as to why those power consumptions numbers are as high as they are, I'll insert it here in the video. All that said, if you work in production, if you're looking for high performance, high redundancy, and basically sustained performance, this thing is hard to argue with. As mentioned in the intro, there are a decent number of USB 4 V2 and Thunderbolt 5 enclosures in the market right now, but this one gives what I would argue is the complete package. It's just a shame about that power consumption for me. Now, in terms of pricing and availability, that is also going to be a point I think will be slightly contentious. Acasis have sent this to me, they've sent both of them to me, but I also have to acknowledge it's going on Kickstarter. Now, I am not completely anti-Kickstarter. We talked about this here on the channel. I do think it is an acceptable way to market a product to the public and also get necessary research and development if you're a small brand or a relatively unknown brand to get your product out there and use that marketing machine. But that's the thing. Acasis isn't new to the market. They, you can't say they are lacking in a lot of marketing research. They have a huge number of enclosures. They even have USB 4 V2 or Thunderbolt 5, an external single bay enclosure, a little docking station thing, as well as multiple ports there. So I'm kind of surprised this brand is going down the crowdfunding route for this. I know Thunderbolt 5 isn't as ubiquitous as some of the other connections in the market, but for the entire range to be taken to Kickstarter kind of surprised me. But I will say, taking it to crowdfunding does afford pretty affordable pricing because it offloads a lot of the marketing work that they would have done within their own business onto crowdfunding. A lot of brands have told me that. And that's almost certainly why, in terms of less so fundraising, but more so affordability at launch, all three devices have got that super early pricing for crowdfunding there. So the Air model is arriving at $249. The model that we talked about today, the 80 gig 4-bay, is arriving at $339 in early pledges. And for the Pro series, that 10-bay that also utilizes Thunderbolt 5 USB 4 V2, that's $699. And all of those are a substantial drop from the RRP when this inevitably goes to full retail. Now, Normally at this point, and I do pretty much stand by this as well, it is crowdfunding, it's not traditional retail. Use payment methods which have an element of reclaim in case something goes wrong. Just be aware you're not buying traditional retail here. But at the same time, I see no scenario where this isn't going to go to traditional retail anyway. And I'm kind of surprised that Acasis have gone down the crowdfunding route. So really, that and the power consumption thing are the only real negative things I can say about this. I will say it's not portable, it weighs a ton, but this isn't really designed, I would argue, for portability. This is a standalone docking station that you connect to when you're going off and you come back, put it down, connect it in, and boom, high performance, reliable and stable storage. This isn't your mother's back pocket external enclosure. But what do you guys think? Again, I strongly recommend checking out that video from David Harry where he goes into that deep dive with the Air Series model. He goes into a lot of the sustained performance numbers there. It is a good video to check out. This is not that video. I like talking about powers and temps. But thank you so much for watching. There is a link in the description to their Kickstarter. It should be live, I am assuming, relatively soon. It's not live at the time of recording. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.